Hello, Tim Russell here, and welcome to another episode of the Multipart Finance podcast. In this episode, I sat down with Nick Moloney, who is the Director of Rain & Horne Commercial North Sydney, so he's a commercial real estate agent, and we're going to be discussing all things commercial property. In particular, I'm going to be sort of asking him questions through the lens of comparing residential to commercial, because I know most of my clients tend to be residential investors. And so we're going to be asking Nick, what are the main differences? What are the pros and cons? What are the sort of the niche things to look out for? It's a great episode. I hope you like it, and I'll hear from you soon. Hey, Nick, how are you?
Good, mate. How are you?
I'm going very well. Now, I knew when we were going to have this chat that I needed to get kitted up because you are the best dressed man in real estate. So I've done my best. I didn't know you were going to wear a tie. And once again, you've outdone me. Well done again.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
Big crown to wear. So I'm happy to wear that any day.
Yeah. Well, look, I wanted to get you on the call, Nick, because you're based in North Sydney. You focus specifically on commercial property from an agent perspective. And most of my client base are resi property people. So they're either buying owner-occupied properties or they're buying investment properties, and they don't really have too much of an idea about commercial, which I think people need more education on, because there's great buying opportunities from an investment point of view. And I think that some of the problems that people have around that is it's a bit scary. They think it's really different. And so today I just wanted to outline, if it is different, why is it different? But also, in my opinion, there's probably a lot of similarities that people will understand when we go through it. So I guess where I wanted to first start with was a misconception that I hear with commercial property, which is commercial property, great yield, but low growth. So a lot of investors think if I've bought 4 or 5 investment properties, I'll switch to get a commercial so I can get good growth and good cash flow. But good cash flow. But I shouldn't expect it to grow too much. Now you're based in North Sydney, Lower North Shore area. The last 5 years, people are very aware that resi real estate has gone really well. What have you seen with commercial property?
So just for context, geographically, the area that I'll cover, as you mentioned, Lower North Shore. So it's really all commercial property types: retail, office, industrial, just north of Chatswood, Milson's Point, over towards Spitbridge. A few decades ago was when the concept of high yield, low growth originated from. And for a period of time, that's what it was. For the last 5 years, that concept has been non-existent. The capital appreciation for our marketplace over the course of the last 5 years has probably been close to about 75 to even 100% growth within a 5-year period. There are some categories and subcategories to that. So within commercial property, you have different asset classes. So you have office space, you have industrial space, and you also have retail space. The best performing assets over that last 5-year period have very clearly been industrial and office. Not to say that retail hasn't done well. Retail still has increased in value and appreciated over that period, but nowhere near to the same kind of percentage that has been seen in the industrial and commercial office space.
Yeah, right. Wow. Well, that's what I was expecting you to answer, by the way. So at least we've got that out of the way. So when I'm dealing with clients, Nick, the buying process, people, I don't know, like there's some expectation that it's slightly different with commercial. I guess in terms of when you're out and about dealing with potential buyers, would you say that the typical buyers in commercial are a little bit different to what you may or may not see in resi?
I think again, that's quite a big misconception. I think commercial property has been painted as this elusive property type or investment opportunity that you've got to be a high profile business person, a part of some form of syndicate, a lot of super funds, large enterprises in commercial property. That is true, but only for a portion of the marketplace. The average client, if you will, from our perspective, is anyone who's buying a commercial property that's worth $400,000, which could be a mum and dad, and they own their home and they want to get one other investment property, all the way through to a $20 million asset that could be within our marketplace at the same time. So we have quite a broad range of clients, but on average, there's a lot of local investors who invest into our particular property type. For the person who doesn't have the experience in our industry, a really good way to look at it from a very practical is it is very, very closely associated to residential. Both property types, both require a contract of sale. And within commercial, as I mentioned before, you've got office, industrial, and retail. The real differences there is obviously the businesses that particular property houses and the industries that they're appropriate for. In terms of differences to residential buying process, probably one of the main items that a lot of people are not aware of is in residential, you have a cooling off period. So you'd exchange a property, you'd pay a proportionate deposit, and then you'd have a 7-day cooling off period. Within commercial, that doesn't exist. So as soon as you pay your deposit, you're paying 10%. As soon as you sign the contract, the property is unconditionally exchanged. Additionally, in the commercial environment, at an auction for a commercial property, residentially, you have to register to bid. Commercially, you don't have to register. In a commercial property auction environment, it's assumed that you've done your due diligence, that you've researched the information that is applicable to the property. And if that said individual decides to bid for the property, they are in turn bidding to purchase it. So they're probably the two biggest differences. Sorry.
I was going to say, be careful with your hands no, not your hands. I was going to say, be careful with your hands if you're going to auction for a commercial property, because you might just get it.
Right. Yes, absolutely. What you're talking to me. For a commercial, when you're buying a commercial property in an auction environment, you don't need to register. Residentially, you do need to register to bid, but if you're bidding for a commercial property at an auction, it's assumed that you've done your due diligence, you've researched the information, and if you're bidding, you are bidding to purchase the property.
Yeah. And so I presume it'll be similar in terms of, do you take a property to auction? Do you take a property just on a private treaty sale? Is that very much the same as resi? It's linked to market conditions, the type of property that Absolutely. You're selling, all that sort of stuff. It's all pretty much the same, right?
Yeah, it is. There's probably a higher percentage of properties that go to auction residentially. Again, within commercial as a total industry type, you'd probably estimate around about 40 to say 50% of properties are auctioned. Within commercial property, you do have some quite unique specific properties that are only appropriate for a small number of users or small number of tenants. In that particular circumstance, it's likely that would probably just be a for sale campaign. Yeah. Same principles apply. You'd average 4 to 6 week campaign, run the property to auction, and then the objective would be to sell and or have somebody buy the property at the auction. Yeah.
Now, I suspect the reason why no cool-off period applies to it, and one of the things that I see from the finance perspective is that people get it. There's a misunderstanding about the valuations and how long it takes. So for commercial property, it can take anywhere from 5 to definitely at least 5 days to 2 or 3 weeks. So because of that time period, I presume that is why most of the times an agent wouldn't consider a call-off period, because it just takes too long for the finance to get sorted for it.
Yeah, the valuation process is quite similar. I mean, if we're talking about properties sub $10 million, and it's not too complex, you'd probably estimate that you have your valuation back within about a 5-day period. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer, but that's kind of where the expectation is set.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, on valuations, I suspect why you might see a little bit of, in terms of commercial properties, maybe not always going to auction. From the percentages that you said, it's probably less, you'd say, than resi. And part of that, I believe, would be the fact that there's a bit of a formula to being able to value a commercial property. So there's probably less emotion, particularly for investors when they're looking at buying a commercial property. Do you maybe just want to just outline how you would value a property?
Yeah, absolutely. So using residential as the comparison, the general metrics for residential is you're probably looking at number of bedrooms, bars, whether it's got a car space or doesn't. If it's a house, what's the block size? What's the land size?
Yeah.
Commercially speaking, there's two valuation methods. There's a valuation method for a vacant property, and there is a valuation method which is applicable to a tenanted property. And just because it's tenanted, so for example, if there's a tenant in place that's simply on a month-to-month lease, that doesn't necessarily qualify as quote unquote tenanted. The best way I usually try and describe it is, if you're looking at a commercial property and there is a lease in place for 1.5 years or less, you adopt the vacant possession, or it's called a direct rate per square metre comparison. If there is a tenant in place for 1.5 years or more, you would adopt the tenanted or yield analysis methodology. So the formula for a vacant property is taking the sale price of the property and then dividing it by the square meterage of the property that you're looking at. For example, if you're looking at a property which is worth $2 million and the property is approximately 236 square meters in size, let's just go round numbers, 200 square meters in size, that gives you $10,000 per square meter. So that metric, that metric of $10,000 a square meter is what you're going to use to compare property to property. So if you then go and look at another property which is also worth $2 million, but it's only 100 square meters, your metric is $20,000. So if they're in the same location, they're both office space, they're both relatively similar, and the market is at $10,000 per square meter, but the other property that you're looking at is $20,000 per square meter, well, instantaneously you can identify that property is either overpriced, the vendor's expectations are too high, or it might be a fishing expedition and they're trying to get a silly price for the property. But the formula of price per square meter divided by the area, which provides you the rate per square meter, the metric of the rate per square meter is what you're going to use to compare your property. You can do that through industrial, office, and retail. Same formula for all asset classes. That's the vacant possession side. If you then have a property that you're looking at, let's say, for example, you're looking at it for investment purposes, and it has a tenant in place, and this is more commonly applied to properties that have a lease in place of 1.5 years or more. So another key distinguishing factor of commercial is your average lease term for an investment is not 12 months and then you swap tenants out. You're really looking for long-term tenants, which are, you want to try and secure a tenant for 3 years, 4 years, or depending on the size of the property, you might even sign a lease contract for 5 years. So you negotiate with a tenant, sign them up for a 5-year lease, and then each year that tenant's responsible for paying a proportion of rent. With a yield analysis, the metric that you're trying to identify is the return, the ROI, yield, or return on investment. So for example, if we've got a property which is worth, let's say, for example, $1 million, and then I'm going to get my calculator out for this one because once we go into percentiles, I'm not quite a whiz.
Yeah. I never leave home without my man.
So the key thing that you want to do when you're looking at a tenanted property, you want to identify what is the net income. So the net income is the gross income that the tenant pays, and that could be inclusive of car spaces. So let's say, for example, they're paying $30,000 for the office, but then they're paying an extra $10,000 for the 2 car spaces that are allocated to the property as well. So you've got, did I say 20,000, 20,000 and 10,000? So you've got $30,000 gross income. So then we want to deduct the outgoings, and then the outgoings are going to be considered if we're in a strata environment. So if we're talking about individual units, we're talking about strata rates, council rates, and water rates. Again, very, very similar. So and they're defined as our outgoings. So let's say, for example, our outgoings are $10,000 per annum. And we always work on an annual basis in commercial, not quarterly. You want to amortize it over the year. You want to understand what the gross annual rent is over a year, what the gross outgoings are over a year. So if we then go $30,000 of gross income, which is the office and the car space, sometimes the car spaces are adopted into the office rent, but you've just got to identify that, and usually the agent will tell you. So we've got $30,000 combined, $20,000 for the office, $10,000 for the car spaces. We then have an annual amount for strata rates. We then have an annual amount for water rates and an annual amount for council rates. Let's say that is $10,000. So we go gross income, which is $30,000, minus our gross annual outgoings, which is $10,000, leaves us with $20,000 of net income. It's really important that you use the net income, not the gross income, because the gross income will give you false figures. What you need to identify is the net income figure. Once we have the net income of approximately $20,000, you'll take the net income and then divide that by the sale price. So let's say this particular property has an advertised price of $750,000. So we go 20,000 divided by the sale price of $750,000. So that then translates to a 2.6% net return. So the metric that we've just identified is 2.6%. So what you can do is you can take that net return, and that's the metric that you're going to then use to compare that property against other tenant investment properties. So you'll apply the same formula to each individual property. And then once you've done the net income divided by the sale price, that'll translate to a yield, is probably the most common in our industry. And then let's say, for example, you're looking at 3 properties. Property number A, that's 2.6% net return, and that's annual. Property B, that's 3.6% net return annually. And then property C, which is 7.5% net return. I'm just plucking numbers out here just for the purpose of example. So then we've got 3 properties, all of different yields. Now, the industry average for my marketplace at the moment, if you're looking at an office space, you're probably going to be sitting somewhere between about 4 to 5%. If you're sitting in that range, that's probably what you deem as an acceptable return on a property for a commercial investment. If you're looking at industrial, you're probably going to anticipate something around about the same range, about 4%, maybe 5.5%, depending on the price point. For retail at the moment, just relative to where we are in time, retail was quite negative with COVID. A lot of retail businesses closed, restaurants, retail shops, cafes, things of that nature. So investors at the moment aren't as quite aggressive on retail properties as they historically were. So retail at the moment, you're probably going to be looking at around about a 6 to 7% net return. So if we circle back to those 3 properties, we've got property A at 2.6, property B at 3.6, and then property C, and I think I said 7.5. So at the moment, the most clearly identified property that to me, that I would look at and deem as reasonable, 3.6% is a bit tight to that 4 to 5% range. 2.6% is very, very low for commercial standards. You really do want to see, particularly if you're in office, you really want to see somewhere around about that kind of 4 to 5% range. And then the 7.5% net return property, to me, that indicates that there's maybe something more to it. There's got to be a reason why the property is priced at a point which would give an investor 7.5% return. So once you've got those metrics, you can then take that net income and then you can play around with the price. So, for example, if we take our initial property of $20,000 net income, we want to land somewhere in the middle of about that 4 to 5% yield range. We then times our net income of $20,000 by, say, 4.5%. If we go 20,000, sorry, divide by 4.5%, 0.045. So to get our market price for the property with a $20,000 net income at a 4.5% yield, that then translates to a price of approximately $450,000. But the key takeaway is you want to use the yield for investment properties as the metric. The net income will never change. It's the price that changes.
Yeah.
So if the price goes up, yield goes down. If the price goes down, the yield goes up. So the less you pay, the higher your return's going to be.
Yeah.
And where you want to end up is in that kind of 4 to 5% range. And if you're going through your research phase of searching for properties and you're seeing that properties are maybe slightly higher than where they should be, reason to investigate. If there's properties that are slightly lower than where they should be, reason to investigate, or the property's priced too high. I might be worth kind of giving you the formulas so that you can print them out and then maybe share them with everyone. But as an industry standard, that's the same valuation methodology that banks will use. It's the same valuation methodology that agents will use. And it's the same valuation methodology that the marketplace uses as well.
Yeah. I imagine if you're talking to a client and about to sell their property, that's a bit of an education process for them. Maybe expectations need to get met a little bit sometimes.
It is.
Yeah.
And that, honestly, that's probably the biggest obstacle that it takes for people to get into commercial property. Once you understand and comprehend those methods, that's it. It's just a matter of going through the process, going through the exercise a couple of times. It's very, very nice, as you said before, is values about a moment and whether the property is right for the family, whether the property is right for the investor. Do we want this view? Do we want this size kitchen? Do we want this size backyard? Commercial, very, very neutral. Facts, figures, dollars and cents.
Yeah. Now, on that, Nick, I didn't ask you about this before, but I know that's for some people, some of the concerns they have when they look to buy a commercial property is this thing about GST that's applicable on the sale. So sometimes people say, okay, the banks are only going to lend 80%, which is good now. Like it was 65, 70 for a long time, but they've sort of gone up to 80%. But now I've got to pay an extra 10% when I'm buying a commercial property. Could you just explain a little bit about this GST thing that's applicable to commercial?
Yeah, absolutely. So and this falls back to the reason why there's a valuation for vacant property, valuation for tenanted property.
Yeah. And
it's really important to understand that there's two different scenarios for potentially the same property. The clearest way to describe it is if the property is vacant, as in physically vacant, there is no tenant in place at the time of exchange and settlement, GST is applicable. Now, I say that quite loosely because obviously that needs to be vetted by any solicitor. There might be variables in that scenario. It's really important that whoever is looking at this particular property, or if they're doing their research, make sure that you speak to the solicitor. They are the individual that will be able to certify for you that that is the case. But in principle, and a loose understanding is if a property is vacant, GST is applicable. Now, the other scenario, particularly and this is more focused towards investors, they want long-term tenants, they want cash flow, they want return. In the scenario where there is a tenant in place at the time of exchange and settlement, the commercial industry does not charge, or the government does not charge GST.
Yeah.
So it's called it's deemed as what's called a sale of a going concern.
Yeah.
So the quickest way to check this, and again, I will reinforce, speak to the solicitor, make sure that you clarify with them, get your legal advice from them. But the quickest way to check this is have a look at the contract. on page 2 of every single contract, in the top quarter of the page, there is a section which says GST. And then to the right of that, there's 3 boxes, and it will say GST paid in full, which means GST is applicable. GST is not applicable, or there's an alternative box which says other, and then you need to speak to the agent and find out what the reasoning is. But in layman's terms, if the property is vacant, GST is applicable. If the property is tenanted, you do not pay GST on the purchase.
Yeah. Another loaded question from me, Nick, because I know that most people listening to this call will be looking at it as an investor. So I just thought I'd clarify that.
Yeah, but it is, I mean, it's and like for anyone going through this process, have a conversation with your accountant. It's really important to get all the legwork out of the way first. Speak to your accountant. You know, if they're proficient in commercial property, they will know the ins and outs of it. If they're not, see if they can point you in the direction of somebody who is. But they will be able to advise you. GST is payable. It works the same as it would, conceptually speaking, from a business perspective. So GST paid, you get to claim the GST back. But really what you're looking at is it's a cash flow position. So because if you're buying a vacant property, you're paying $1 million plus 10%. So that's another $100,000 that you have to come up with on settlement.
Yeah.
If you buy another property that's tenanted and it's also $1 million, the settlement figure is only going to be $1 million plus whatever else is involved in the ins and outs and the finites of the transaction.
Yeah.
But definitely a little, I wouldn't call it a loophole, but I'd definitely say it's something which is quite often overlooked by people who are fairly early on in their kind of buying process or buying cycle with commercial property.
Yeah. One last question for you, and just it's more about an opinion of where things are going.
Yeah, sure.
We've had COVID. It was a disaster for everyone.
Yep.
We're all aware with commercial property, there was a combination of tenants renegotiating with landlords. A lot of the, from what I saw, those who sort of worked together were able to come out of it okay. Hopefully, we won't go through this again. And so,
yeah.
I know with me, I in my business, I've come a complete circle in that now I run to the office every morning, and I hate working from home. And I've seen a lot of companies now have stricter mandates that they want to have people back in offices, because the data coming through the last year and a half it was pretty clear that morale, motivation, and efficiencies have all gone up with people being in the office. So I don't think we're gonna go into that period where people were talking about this utopian society where everything was going to be online. I think that's going to go away. But are you sort of seeing things go back to normal a little bit in terms of mentality from buyers and investors with commercial property?
Yeah, I mean, I might have a little bit of a biased foresight on this, because obviously,
well, you do.
I want to make sure that my business is still going.
Yeah.
But in terms of what we're seeing from the actual marketplace itself, the conversations that we're having with businesses, and these are small businesses of staff, anywhere from five to 10 staff, all the way up to staff. We're talking about 80 staff, 100 staff, whatever it may be. There is definitely a trend that the company owners, directors, whoever it may be, do want to get people back into the office for all of those reasons that you said before.
Yeah.
Looking at productivity, morale, particularly culture, has become really, really important for a lot of businesses. We are having, and I'm finding myself having more and more and more conversations about people who are looking at buying property about the culture of their business.
Yeah.
It's really important after the last 24 months that we've been through, that the directors and the owners are making decisions which is going to provide a good culture for the business, and a place where people want to go to work. So there was definitely a trend of, a lot of comments and conversations. What's going to happen? Is office space ever going to be needed again? Is all the office going to get converted into residential? My simple answer to that is no. I think that the general theme and the appetite from businesses towards wanting to get everyone back into the office is going to outweigh and the benefits of having an office environment are going to outweigh the desire for the few which may want to work with home. I will preface, there's a lot of people that are working on a little bit of a scheduled arrangement. I'd probably say most of the people that I speak to are working in some form of structure where it's a flexible arrangement. So they might have, they might give the staff the option to choose one day off a week, or they might have, staff come in on Mondays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, and then Tuesdays and Fridays, everyone works from home. There's a lot more of a flexible working arrangement, which is in our kind of community at the moment. I don't think that we will ever get back to where we were in this really kind of rigid concept of everyone has to go into the office.
Yeah.
But I would say, to put some facts and figures to it, I'd probably expect that we're going to see at least 80% of the market working towards an arrangement where the businesses are operating from office space.
Yeah.
There's a lot of loss from, as you said, productivity. Also, mental health has become a significantly talked about item and concern, particularly for a lot of businesses. And directors and companies seem to be very aware of that. So a lot of people are really taking a lot of proactive steps towards providing a workspace which is enjoyable, where people can thrive, people want to come to work. Within the same breath, there are going to be smaller businesses and industries which they don't need to come back to the office. A lot of people that we speak to in IT, I'm selling 2 places down in Milsons Point at the moment for a gentleman that I sold the spaces to him for 315 square metres of space in Milsons Point, right on the harbour, big balcony, overlooks Lavender Bay. Fantastic space. Doesn't need the space anymore.
Yeah.
Runs an IT security company. All the guys are happy to work from home. Those types of industries, I think, particularly in IT and programming, is where you're going to see a couple of or a bit more of a work from home arrangement in place. But generally, as a whole, I definitely expect majority of people to come back into the office environment.
Yeah. Mate, agreed. Well, Nick, I'm always conscious of your time. Very much appreciate the chat. And I'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much, man.
Easy done. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me. I'll speak to you soon.